It was a crisp Saturday evening, the kind where the cool air wraps around you like a soft, refreshing blanket. The smell of roast chicken and fresh herbs wafted through the house, filling the air with the promise of a delicious family dinner. I stood by the kitchen counter, finishing the last of my preparation for the meal we would all enjoy together. The table, set with pristine white plates and golden cutlery, gleamed under the soft light of the chandelier. My parents had always prided themselves on hosting these grand dinners, and tonight was no exception. The crystal glasses sparkled like jewels, and the floral centerpiece added a touch of elegance to the already immaculate dining room. It was always the same. My parents seemed to live for these moments of perfection, where everything appeared flawless. I was excited about the evening. It had been weeks since we'd all gathered as a family, and I was eager to catch up with everyone. I smiled as I thought of the familiar faces, my siblings, my cousins, and even my grandparents. Our family gatherings were the highlight of my year, a time when we could come together, share stories, and laugh without a care in the world. I had always felt like I belonged at these gatherings, like I was a part of something larger than myself. My mother, ever the hostess, was flitting around the house, making sure everything was in place. She was beautiful in her own way, graceful, with a quiet confidence that made everyone around her feel comfortable. Her dark, wavy hair cascaded down her back, and her dress, a deep shade of emerald, shimmered as she moved. She wore a smile that could light up any room, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Maybe it was just the pre-dinner jitters. I had always noticed how she seemed to put so much pressure on herself when hosting these events. I caught a glimpse of my father in the study, reviewing his notes for a speech he would undoubtedly deliver later in the evening. He was a man of routine, a man who believed that everything had its place. His sharp suits and perfectly groomed hair gave off an air of authority that was hard to ignore. But when it came to family, he was all business. No spontaneous jokes, no warm hugs, just the sense that his role in the family was to maintain order. I never could figure out how to make him laugh, and that left a strange gap in our relationship. Despite his wealth and status, he seemed so distant, like he was always looking past me, past everyone. Dinner was scheduled to start at 7 p.m., and I was ready. I wore a sleek, navy blue dress, one that had been handpicked by my mother for its elegance. I had no objection to the dress. In fact, I liked it, though it was a bit formal for my taste. I preferred simplicity over the extravagant styles my parents always chose for me. The clock ticked down, the minutes stretching into what felt like hours. The guests began to trickle in one by one. The sound of muffled voices, the clinking of glasses, and the rustle of clothing filled the house. My cousins arrived first, followed by a few family friends who always seemed to pop in unannounced. I greeted each one with a polite smile and small talk, though I couldn't help but notice the tension in the air. My father was always so meticulous about appearances, and I wondered if the pressure of his perfect family had started to get to him. My younger brother, Jason, was already running around the house, excited as always. He was only 9, but had the energy of 1,000 suns, darting between rooms and talking about anything and everything. I chuckled to myself as I watched him, his infectious enthusiasm lightening the mood. My sister, on the other hand, was nowhere to be found. Emily had always been a bit of an enigma. She preferred to stay out of the spotlight, content to retreat to her room or quietly observe from the corner. I found my grandmother in the living room, sitting by the window with a soft smile on her face. She had always been a calming presence in the family. Her silver hair, worn in a simple bun, contrasted sharply with her warm, kind eyes. She had always been there for me, offering advice whenever I needed it. "You look beautiful, my dear," she said, her voice low and comforting as I sat down beside her. "Thanks, Grandma," I replied, settling in next to her. Her presence was always reassuring, as though nothing could go wrong when she was around. But deep down, I knew there was something on my mind, something that had been bothering me for a while now, though I couldn't place my finger on it. "Are you looking forward to dinner?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with a knowing glint. "I am," I said, though the words felt hollow in my mouth. I had been looking forward to it, but now I wasn't so sure. It wasn't about the food or the company, it was something else, something I couldn't quite explain. The clock struck 7 p.m., and my father appeared at the top of the staircase, his voice booming across the house. "Everyone, please make your way to the dining room. Dinner is served." The guests began to shuffle towards the dining room, and I found myself lingering behind, watching as they all took their places at the grand table. The table was large, enough to seat 20 comfortably, with enough room for everyone to spread out. My family took their seats with practiced ease, the adults at the main table, the children at the smaller table in the corner of the room. I stood by the door, waiting to be assigned my place, when I noticed something strange. My parents had already taken their seats at the head of the table, as usual. But as I glanced around, I saw that everyone was sitting at their designated spots, everyone except me. My heart skipped a beat as my mother looked at me with a faint smile, gesturing toward the kids' table at the far end of the room. "Why don't you go ahead and sit there, sweetheart?" she said, her tone light but firm. I froze for a moment, unsure if I had heard her correctly. The kids' table? But I was no longer a child. I was 22, a young adult, not someone who should be relegated to the corner with the younger kids. My pulse quickened, a sense of humiliation rising within me. But I swallowed the lump in my throat, trying to maintain my composure. "Sure," I said, my voice quieter than I intended, and walked over to the small table, my head spinning with confusion and frustration. I sat down at the edge of the table, feeling the eyes of my younger cousins on me. They were all chatting happily among themselves, unaware of the silent tension I was battling. My younger brother, Jason, plopped down beside me, grinning from ear to ear. "Isn't this fun?" he asked, his voice brimming with excitement. "Yeah, it's great," I replied, my words hollow. The clinking of silverware and soft murmurs of conversation from the main table made my stomach twist. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as though I were no longer a part of my own family. The adults, including my parents, were laughing, talking about their business dealings and reminiscing about old times. I could hear snippets of their conversations, their voices filled with warmth and familiarity, but it was as if I was invisible, a shadow at the periphery of their world. For the first time in my life, I felt truly alone, disconnected from the family I had always loved. Something wasn't right, and I could feel it deep in my bones. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a storm that would shatter the perfect image my family had carefully crafted for years. The evening began to unfold in a haze of clinking glasses, forced smiles, and the hum of distant conversations. I sat at the kids' table, doing my best to smile and engage with my younger cousins. Jason, of course, was in his element, chattering away about his latest adventures at school, about how he was going to be the best soccer player in the world, and how he had managed to avoid getting grounded for his last bout of mischief. He was, as always, the life of the party, oblivious to the strange heaviness that was settling over me. But I couldn't shake the feeling. The unsettling, gnawing sense that something wasn't quite right. It wasn't just the seating arrangement, though that was a blow to my pride. It was more than that. It was the way the evening had started, with my parents' sudden distance, their subtle shift in behavior that I couldn't quite place. They were pretending like everything was normal, but it felt like they were hiding something that had nothing to do with roast chicken or fancy tablecloths. I tried to focus on the conversation, but it was hard when all I could hear was the muted laughter from the main table. Their voices, bright and full of energy, felt like they were drifting further and further away, as though they were all in another world. A world I didn't seem to belong to anymore. Then it happened. The moment I had been dreading, though I didn't know it at the time. The moment that would unravel everything. It started with a text message. My phone buzzed silently in my pocket, and I slipped it out discreetly, thinking it might be a friend or a quick reminder. But when I saw the name on the screen, my stomach lurched. It was from Emily, my sister. "I need to talk to you." "Now." "Upstairs." I looked up, catching her eye across the room. She was seated at the main table, next to our parents. Her face was neutral, but there was a glint of something in her eyes, something I couldn't quite place. Something that said this wasn't just another ordinary family dinner. Excusing myself from the table, I made my way upstairs to the study, where I knew Emily would be waiting for me. The house seemed unnervingly quiet as I ascended the stairs. The usual warmth, the comforting hum of conversation, was replaced by an eerie stillness, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I found her standing by the window, her back to me. She was gazing out at the darkening sky, her arms folded tightly across her chest. Her posture was stiff, as though she was trying to hold herself together. "Emily?" I said, my voice tentative. She turned slowly, her face pale in the dim light. Her usually confident demeanor was gone, replaced by a look of quiet desperation. For the first time, I saw her as vulnerable, completely different from the sister I had always known. "Come in," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I stepped into the room, my heart pounding. "What's going on? Why did you text me?" She hesitated, glancing toward the door as if checking to make sure no one was listening. Then, she met my gaze, and I saw something in her eyes that made my blood run cold. I didn't want to tell you like this, but I don't know how else to say it." I raised an eyebrow, a sense of dread creeping over me. "What are you talking about?" "Mom and Dad, they've been keeping something from you," she said, her voice shaking. "Something big. Something that affects all of us." I felt a tightness in my chest, the words she had just spoken weighing heavily on me. "What do you mean? What is it?" She took a deep breath, running a hand through her hair as if she were trying to steady herself. "You know how Mom and Dad have been acting lately? All distant? Well, it's because of what happened with the family business. With the money." I felt my stomach twist. My family had always been financially secure, rich, even, but the business was something that my parents had always kept separate from us, their personal lives. I had never questioned it. But now, the way Emily was looking at me, the way she was speaking, made me feel like I had missed something important. "Money? What do you mean, Emily?" She glanced around the room nervously before lowering her voice. "It's about the inheritance. Dad's been hiding it from you, from all of us. He's been making deals behind our backs, moving things around, and the worst part? He's been hiding money from you. You're not getting what you're supposed to get when he dies. I don't know all the details, but it's bad. Really bad." My mind reeled as her words sank in. My heart pounded in my chest, and my breath came faster as the implications of what she had just revealed hit me. Inheritance? Money? My father had always been so meticulous with everything, so careful. The idea that he was hiding something from me, from the entire family, was unthinkable. I shook my head, trying to process what she was saying. "How do you know all of this?" Emily bit her lip, looking away. "I overheard something I wasn't supposed to hear. Dad was on the phone, talking to someone. He said he was moving assets around, setting up a trust, and he mentioned that you wouldn't be receiving anything from the will. Not the way you think." My world tilted, the room spinning around me. It felt as though the floor had been pulled out from under me. I could barely process the enormity of what Emily was saying, yet I knew in my gut that she was telling the truth. There was no denying the shock in her eyes, the anxiety in her voice. "So, you're telling me he's cutting me out?" I whispered, my voice trembling with the weight of disbelief. Emily nodded, her face pale. "Yes, and it's not just you. It's all of us. It's like he's been planning something behind our backs for years." I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing, trying to make sense of it all. The life I had known, the life I had taken for granted, was a lie. Everything that my parents had told me, everything I thought I understood about our family, was falling apart in front of me. And the worst part? They had been planning this behind closed doors. They had invited me here tonight, knowing full well what they were doing, knowing how much it would hurt me. It was a cold, calculated betrayal. I felt sick to my stomach, like the floor had dropped out from beneath me. I wanted to scream, to confront them right then and there, but I couldn't. I was trapped in a web of lies, and the only way out was to find the truth. Before I could say anything, Emily spoke again, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry. I wish I could do more. But you have to be careful. You can't trust them anymore." I nodded, my mind spinning, and without another word, I turned and left the room, my heart heavy with the crushing weight of the betrayal. I needed time to think. Time to process what I had just learned. But more than anything, I needed to know one thing. Why? Why had my parents done this? What had driven them to cut me out of their plans so ruthlessly? And, most importantly, what was I going to do about it? The weight of Emily's words sat like a stone in my chest. I could hardly breathe, and my mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle that had suddenly appeared in my life. My parents, the people I had trusted the most, had betrayed me in a way I could never have imagined. The inheritance, the business dealings, everything had been manipulated right under my nose. They had planned this, and I had been oblivious to it. I stood in the hallway, leaning against the cold, polished wall, trying to steady my breathing. My hands were shaking, and my heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the sounds of the dinner party continuing downstairs. The thought of returning to that table, to their smiling faces, felt impossible. How could I sit there with them, knowing what I knew now? I needed answers, and I needed them fast. But I couldn't confront them, not yet. Not without understanding exactly what had been going on. I had to gather information, piece together the clues, and figure out what my next move would be. As I walked back to my room, my mind started to work through the next steps. I needed to be careful. This wasn't just about family drama. This was about money, trust, and something far more sinister than I had ever expected. If they had been hiding this from me, what else had they hidden? I closed the door to my bedroom behind me, locking it with a soft click. For a moment, I just stood there, feeling the weight of everything that had transpired. But then, I pushed all the emotions aside. I couldn't afford to let myself fall apart, not yet. I needed to think clearly, methodically. I needed to find the truth. First, I went to the one place I knew I could access without suspicion, my father's study. His office was the heart of the business, a place where everything seemed to come together. It was meticulously organized, with leather-bound books, framed photos of business deals and partnerships, and stacks of paperwork that never seemed to end. It was also the place where my father spent most of his time, where he had always seemed so focused, so in control. The door was locked, but that didn't stop me. I had always known where he kept his spare key. My father, always so careful about his privacy, had no idea that I had once discovered it hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the hallway. I retrieved the key now, my fingers cold against the metal. There was no turning back. I inserted the key into the lock and opened the door, stepping into the quiet, dimly lit room. The familiar scent of leather and would hit me immediately, and I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of nostalgia. This room had always felt like my father's domain, a place where he was untouchable, a place where the rules of the world didn't apply. But now it felt different. It felt like a place of secrets, a place where the truth had been hidden away. I went straight to the desk, where I knew he kept his most important documents. My fingers brushed over the smooth surface of the polished wood, feeling a strange sense of urgency. I opened the first drawer and immediately found what I was looking for: folders marked with names I didn't recognize, business partners, and clients that I had never heard of. There were numbers scribbled on papers, contracts with fine print, and a few legal documents that made my stomach churn. But it wasn't until I opened the second drawer that I found the first real clue. It was a small folder, tucked away in the back under a pile of other papers. I pulled it out, my pulse quickening as I noticed the words written across the top: estate planning. I flipped open the folder, my hands trembling. The first page was a will, a new will, dated just 2 months ago. My heart stopped as I scanned the document. It was a simple will, detailing the distribution of my father's assets, but there was something striking about it. My name was barely mentioned. In fact, I was listed as receiving a very small portion, less than 10% of the total estate. The rest was split between my parents, with large portions going to various charitable organizations and business interests. But it was what came next that made my blood run cold. There, at the bottom of the page, was a note. For reasons of confidentiality and security, the primary beneficiaries of this estate will be directed to specific trusts under my personal control. A cold, sick feeling spread through my stomach. My father had put everything under his control, kept it hidden away, and deliberately kept me out of the picture. The more I read, the more my mind screamed with disbelief. This wasn't just about money. This was a calculated effort to exclude me, to erase me from their plans. I quickly scanned the other documents in the folder, more details about the business dealings, various financial assets, and accounts in offshore locations I had never heard of. It was clear that my father's wealth had been hidden, disguised under layers of legal jargon and fine print. But the more I read, the more I understood. My father wasn't just protecting the family fortune, he was protecting himself, his reputation, his power. And he had made sure that I would have no part in it. I slammed the folder shut, my heart racing. I needed more. I couldn't just leave it at this. I had to dig deeper. I needed to know who else was involved in this, who else was complicit in keeping me out. I pulled out my phone and texted Emily. I found the will. It's worse than we thought. They've been hiding everything from me. I need more info. What else do you know? She replied almost immediately. It's not just Dad. Mom's been involved too. She's been working with him on this. She's been meeting with people behind your back, setting up the trust accounts. I don't know all the details, but I overheard her talking to someone on the phone about it. My mind reeled. My mother, too? I had always known her as the more nurturing, supportive parent. The one who would listen to my problems and offer advice. But this? This was something I never would have imagined. I had always thought I could count on her. I needed to confront her. But not yet. I wasn't ready to go in without knowing everything. I decided to focus on another angle, financial records. If I could access the family accounts, I might be able to find more evidence of their deceit. It wasn't going to be easy, but I knew exactly where to start. I headed to the family safe, a place I knew well. I had seen my father open it countless times, so I was familiar with the code. I punched in the combination, my heart racing as the door swung open with a satisfying click. Inside, there were stacks of documents, but more importantly, there was a laptop, my father's encrypted device, the one he used for all his private business dealings. I'd never been able to access it, but I knew that if I could get into it, I could find everything I needed. I sat down at the desk, my fingers trembling as I powered up the laptop. It took a few moments, but the login screen appeared. My father's password was simple enough, his initials followed by the year he graduated from college. I typed it in, holding my breath. The screen flickered, and then I was in. I opened the files, one by one, sifting through financial records, investment reports, and secret communications with offshore banks. There was no doubt about it. My parents had been hiding money, moving it around, making shady deals under the guise of family business. But then I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold, an email thread between my mother and a lawyer named Edward Langley. The subject line read, "Finalizing trust, final steps." I opened the email chain and started reading, my eyes scanning the screen quickly. The conversation detailed how my mother and father had been in contact with a series of lawyers and financial planners to move the family assets into a trust, one that would exclude me completely. The emails outlined how they had ensured I wouldn't be able to contest the will, using loopholes and legal tricks to secure their control over the entire estate. My stomach churned. This wasn't just about betrayal, it was a conspiracy. A calculated effort to strip me of everything I thought I was entitled to. And now I had the proof. I leaned back in the chair, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. I had what I needed. The investigation was far from over, but I had enough to make my move. The storm had only just begun. The days that followed were a blur of strategic planning, quiet anger, and a careful hunt for more evidence. But now, with everything I had uncovered, I was ready to make my move. The pieces were in place. My family, the ones who had once been the center of my world, had underestimated me. They had underestimated my resolve. I had everything: the will, the financial records, the email threads between my mother and the lawyer. They had thought I was just a bystander, an unimportant part of the family who could be discarded without a second thought. But I wasn't just a bystander. I was their daughter, and I would make sure they understood that. It was time to expose the betrayal, to expose the lies and the deceit for everyone to see. But I wouldn't do it in a quiet, private way. No, they needed to feel the weight of their actions in the most public way possible. The dinner party had been set for the following Saturday, the same evening when my father would make his big speech about the future of the business, about how everything was going according to plan. It would be the perfect time to strike, to reveal the truth in front of all their friends, colleagues, and family members. I spent the days leading up to the event preparing. I was calm, collected, almost eerily so. My mind was clear, and I knew exactly what I was going to do. I had learned long ago how to keep my emotions in check when necessary. This was not about revenge for the sake of revenge. It was about reclaiming what was rightfully mine. It was about showing them that I wasn't weak, that I wouldn't be silenced. As the evening of the dinner approached, the tension in the house grew palpable. My parents seemed oblivious to the storm brewing underneath the surface. My father had his usual self-assured air, and my mother was busy with last-minute preparations. She was wearing that smile again, the one she wore when everything had to be perfect. But there was a nervousness to her movements, a slight twitch to her eye that I hadn't seen before. I watched them both closely, knowing that the moment would come soon enough. I could feel the weight of the evening pressing down on me, but I refused to let it overwhelm me. They had no idea what was coming. I arrived at the dinner table a little late, purposely fashioning my entrance with a controlled grace, as though nothing had changed. The guests were all seated, drinks in hand, chatting away. My father, ever the center of attention, had already begun his speech, his voice booming across the room as he spoke of the family legacy, the future of the business, and how proud he was of the success they had achieved. My mother sat beside him, her smile never faltering as she nodded in agreement. But as I made my way toward my seat, no longer at the kids' table, but at a seat positioned directly in the middle of the room, I noticed their gazes flicker over me. For a moment, the facade of warmth that had been so carefully maintained began to crack. I saw it in the way my father's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, as if he were trying to gauge my next move. I could feel the anticipation building within me, but I kept my composure. No one would know what was coming, not yet. I took my seat, my back straight, my hands steady. The room seemed to quiet in anticipation, as if they were all waiting for something to happen. They had no idea that this night would change everything. And then, as my father wrapped up his speech, I made my move. "I'd like to make an announcement," I said, my voice cutting through the polite chatter. The room fell into an immediate silence. All eyes turned to me, my family's guests looking at me with curiosity. My father raised an eyebrow. "What is it, darling?" I took a deep breath, the weight of what I was about to do settling into my chest. This was it. The moment when everything would be exposed. The moment they would understand that I was not the naive, obedient daughter they had once known. "I have something I'd like to share with everyone here tonight," I said, my voice steady. "Something that concerns my family, something that none of you know about." I paused for effect, letting the silence hang in the air, heavy and thick. The guests were looking at me, their curiosity piqued. My parents were exchanging uneasy glances, their composure faltering. But they had no idea how deep the truth went. I stood up slowly, the room's attention now entirely on me. My father was fidgeting in his seat, his confident facade cracking. He knew, deep down, that this was not going to be the speech he had been planning. "Several days ago," I continued, my voice unwavering, "I discovered something that has been hidden from me, from all of us. Something that changes everything." I turned to look directly at my parents, their faces pale now. The blood drained from their features, and I could see the panic beginning to set in. My mother's smile had disappeared entirely, replaced by a look of confusion, then dread. "You see," I said, "I found the will. The new one, the one that excludes me. My father has been hiding everything from me. Not only is he trying to take everything for himself, but he's also set up a trust to make sure I get nothing. A trust that my mother has been complicit in setting up." I could hear a few gasps around the room. Some of the guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure of how to respond. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. "I also found the financial records," I continued. The offshore accounts, the shady business dealings, the money that's been moved around to keep it all hidden. And I found the emails between my mother and a lawyer, discussing how to exclude me from the will, from the inheritance. How to erase me from the family. There was a stunned silence. My father looked like he was about to explode, but I wasn't done yet. I've come here tonight not just to expose their lies, but to ensure that everyone knows the truth. Because if I'm not going to get what's rightfully mine, then no one else should either. I reached into my bag, pulling out a stack of documents. I held them up for the entire room to see: the will, the financial records, the email chains. I let this silence stretch out, the weight of the evidence settling on the room like a thick fog. And these, I said, my voice cold and controlled, are just the beginning. I will make sure the world knows what my parents have been hiding from all of us. You can't control the truth forever. I watched as my father's face turned red with anger, his jaw clenching. My mother was sitting there, frozen, her eyes wide with disbelief. They both realized, in that moment, that everything was falling apart. The empire they had carefully built was crumbling in front of their eyes. "Please, darling," my mother began, her voice shaky. "Let's talk about this privately." I shook my head, my eyes never leaving hers. "No, it's too late for that. The truth is already out." I turned to the guests, who were still sitting in stunned silence. "And for the record," I added, "this is how you really run a family business, on lies, deceit, and manipulation. But not anymore." With that, I walked out of the room, leaving my parents and their guests behind in the stunned silence of their own creation. The next few days were a whirlwind. The fallout from that dinner spread like wildfire. News outlets picked up the story about the family business scandal. Lawyers contacted my parents, demanding explanations. Friends turned their backs on them, unable to reconcile the image they had been sold with the truth. My father was forced to step down from his position as CEO, and my mother's reputation suffered irreparably. And as for me, I didn't need the inheritance. I didn't need their money. What I needed, and what I had now, was the knowledge that I had taken control of my own fate. I had shown them that they could not erase me, and I had exposed their corruption to the world. They had thought they could break me, but they had only made me stronger. As for the rest of my life, I was free now. Free to rebuild, to move forward, to create something better than what they had tried to take from me. And in that freedom, I found peace. Act 5. New Life and Redemption. 500 to 1,000 words. The days following the dinner were a blur of legal battles, public scrutiny, and personal reflection. My parents, once pillars of authority in my life, had been toppled. The family business, their empire, was now a crumbling facade, its secrets exposed for the world to see. The weight of everything I had learned, of everything I had done, was heavy, but I wasn't broken. If anything, I was liberated. The truth had set me free. But even more than that, it had ignited a fire within me. For so long, I had lived in their shadow, following the path they had laid out for me without question. But now, I was in control of my own future. I didn't need their wealth or their approval. What I needed was the opportunity to create something of my own, something built on honesty, integrity, and my own terms. It didn't happen overnight. The legal process was long, and it wasn't always easy. There were moments when I doubted myself, when the weight of everything felt like too much to bear. But through it all, I remembered why I had done this, not for revenge, but for myself. I had taken a stand, and now it was time to move forward. In the months that followed, things began to shift. The public eye slowly moved away from my family scandal as new headlines emerged, but the damage was done. My parents were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered empire, while I began to carve out my own path. The trust they had built, the one that had excluded me, was no longer relevant. I had found a way to secure my own future, and it didn't involve their dirty money or their control. I rented a small apartment in the city, far away from the house I had grown up in. It was humble, but it was mine. It was a place where I could breathe freely, where I could rebuild my life on my own terms. I focused on work, my own work. I started consulting for small businesses, offering the expertise I had gained over the years, but this time, I did it without the shadow of my family looming over me. I was building something real, something that belonged to me and no one else. And in doing so, I discovered a new sense of purpose. I wasn't just doing it to survive, I was doing it to thrive. Months passed, and I began to find my rhythm. I developed relationships with people who valued me for who I was, not who my parents were. I reconnected with old friends, those who had seen me for who I truly was, long before the scandal. They welcomed me back with open arms, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged again. But even as I rebuilt my life, I couldn't forget the lessons I had learned. My parents had shown me the danger of unchecked power, the cost of living a life built on secrets. But they had also shown me my own strength. They had underestimated me, thinking that I would crumble under the weight of their betrayal. But I hadn't. Instead, I had taken that betrayal and turned it into the catalyst for my own transformation. I also found redemption in forgiveness. Not for them, but for myself. I had spent so much time angry at the way they had treated me, angry at the injustice of it all. But as I let go of that anger, I realized something profound. Holding onto resentment wouldn't help me grow. It would only keep me chained to the past. So I forgave myself for not seeing the signs sooner, for trusting them when I shouldn't have, and for doubting my own worth. And with that forgiveness came peace. Then, one afternoon, as I was sitting at my favorite cafe, sipping coffee and reviewing my latest project, I received a call. It was from Emily. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice tinged with regret. "I should have told you everything sooner. I didn't realize how much they were hiding from you. I never thought they would go that far." I took a deep breath, letting her words wash over me. "It's okay," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not angry anymore. I'm past that." She paused for a moment before speaking again, this time with more conviction. "I know I can't undo what happened, but I want to be part of your life again. I've realized what really matters. And I don't want to lose you." I smiled softly, feeling a warmth spread through me. "You haven't lost me. I've just been finding myself." And with that, we started rebuilding our relationship. Slowly but surely. We had both changed, but we were learning to move forward together. It wasn't the life I had imagined for myself, but it was mine. And that made all the difference. As I sat there, looking out at the bustling city, I realized something. The life I had once wanted, one of luxury, power, and family approval, wasn't what mattered anymore. What mattered was that I had found my own strength. I had risen from the ashes of betrayal and built a new life from the ground up. And in that quiet moment, I knew that I was finally free. Free to live life on my own terms. Free to be the person I was always meant to be. The past was gone. And with it, the chains that had once bound me.